Welcome to a special broadcast of Proclaim Liberty, and today with me I have special guest James Silberman from Free the States, and he's been writing a lot of articles lately, but there was something that stood out in one of his articles about the exception that people want for abortion for the life of the mother, and we're going to talk about that today because I was impressed by some information that he had in one of the articles I'd recently looked at. Me and him talked about it over the phone. But obviously, I don't have my bros with me today. I don't have Sam Ketcher from Hilltop, and I don't have Tim Gillespie from Liberty Church. I think they're both down at the casino again, trying to win some big bucks to try to keep this broadcast going. No, I'm joking. They're not down at the casino. They're good Free Will Baptist brothers. There we go. But anyway, so today we're going to welcome James Silberman. And James, it's good that you could be with me today.
Yeah, I really appreciate the invite. Really love what you guys are doing here with the podcast. We need more of these sprouting up all over the place.
Yeah. So. Does the equipment all look familiar to you?
Yeah. I know this mic.
You know that mic? Well, yeah. But I think I was able to find better bargains. My boom stands, I think only cost me like $25 or something.
Oh, nice.
So you guys got the good stuff. So. And I got the cheap headphones. So, but anyway, James, what I wanted to talk about is when I talk to ministers about abolitionism. These are good men who have, all they've known is the pro-life movement and the methodology of the pro-life movement. And some of them may not even fully understand what that means, but they just know that it's a movement that it's against abortion. And it's all there's ever been. And so now they're hearing about abolitionism, particularly since the SBC resolution.
Yeah.
Basically moving the Southern Baptists to the position of abolitionism.
Yep. Now everyone's got to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah. So now it's a hot topic.
Yep.
Because no matter what anyone says, the way the Southern Baptists go is the way a lot of evangelicalism goes. And so now this is very serious. So now lots of conversations are starting up. And because these are good men who don't want to see anyone hurt, the thing that concerns them the most is when they hear the phrase, no exceptions. And so when they see no exceptions, the immediate thing that comes into a minister's mind is they do not want to see women dying. And so obviously when we talk about no exceptions for the life of the mother, what we're talking about is that it's being considered that there are abortions that are needed for a condition known as ectopic pregnancy. And that's really what we're dealing with when we talk about exception for the life of the mother. And so, but I think that me and you, you've sent me a bunch of material that I was able to look at that maybe the pro-life movement and denominations and ministers haven't really been looking at it clearly and have everything kind of morally and ethically defined well.
Right.
So could you, for everyone watching, first just explain what an ectopic pregnancy is?
Yeah, so an ectopic pregnancy is when the child who is conceived does not make it all the way to the uterus where he or she is supposed to implant, where he or she can receive the nutrients needed to grow to the point where they can be born. Typically, it's in the fallopian tube that they get mistakenly implanted. Sometimes it's in the abdomen, but typically in the fallopian tube. And so what happens often is that the miscarriage occurs naturally before any medical intervention is needed. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you do have a case
that's
where...
like the majority of it, isn't it?
Something like that.
A large percentage, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't feel comfortable probably putting a specific number on it,
yeah.
just based on my experience with it. But I know that is something that does frequently occur.
Yeah.
And so, but sometimes that doesn't happen, and sometimes you have a child who is still alive and growing, obviously in a fallopian tube that is not large enough or have the nutrients necessary to preserve that child. Yeah. And so, that's kind of in a gist, or summed up what an ectopic pregnancy is.
All right. So when we're talking about ectopic pregnancy, for the old timers, they know that as tubal pregnancy.
Right.
That's because me and you were just reading the C. Everett Koop article, and he's calling it tubal pregnancy back in the 80s. So what ministers are very concerned with before they would ever commit themselves to abolitionism, because I think a lot of people are moving towards a kind of a hybrid position where it's not full abolitionism, and they say, well, I don't want to see mothers die. Why are these guys insisting that there is no exception for an abortion to save the life of a mother? Well, is it true that abortions are necessary to save women in an ectopic pregnancy condition?
Right. So the answer to that question depends on definitions. And so it's very important that we don't define the treatment of ectopic pregnancies as abortion for a couple different reasons. One is just the way in which that impugns people who have to have ectopic pregnancies treated. I mean, there's a family, one of the authors of the SBC resolution had a member of his church who needed an ectopic pregnancy treated recently, which is obviously a very tragic situation. But he wouldn't say that the member of his church had an abortion, right? That would be, that person, that couple is grieving. They don't need to be told you killed your child.
Yeah.
You know,
you just murdered your child.
Right. And so it's very important just for I guess clarity in terms of protecting the way that people process that tragic situation. It's important, but it's also a medically important thing. And I guess to kind of go above our pay grade here, I would just step on over and cite a document called the Dublin Declaration. Now, this is written by OBGYNs and I think explicitly OBGYNs.
And that's who would know. These are the people who deal with it, delivering thousands of babies all the time who are in ectopic pregnancies.
Yep. And so here's what the Dublin Declaration says. It says, as experienced medical practitioners and researchers in obstetrics and gynecology, we affirm that direct abortion, the purposeful destruction of the unborn child, that's the important part. They're defining abortion as the purposeful destruction of the unborn child, is not medically necessary to save the life of a woman. We uphold that there is a fundamental difference between abortion and necessary medical treatments that are carried out to save the life of the mother, even if such treatments result in the loss of her unborn child. We confirm that the prohibition of abortion does not affect in any way the availability of optimal care to pregnant women. And so, it's not just like a whole bunch of radical, preachers and activists who are saying no exceptions to abortion. You've got more than 1,000 OBGYN signees of a document saying no, abortion, there's a fundamental difference between intentionally destroying a child in the womb and what they explain is basically giving birth early. There are cases even outside of ectopics. You'll have cases at 24, 26, 30, 32 weeks where sometimes you have to begin the labor process early just because of the condition that the mother is in, a complication that's occurring. To save both lives, you've got to induce labor early. And an ectopic it's an especially tragic version of that where the birth has to be induced at a point where the child is not going to survive. Now, what's important is that the medical industry feels pressure to develop the technology and the treatments necessary where a child can survive that, whether it be reimplanting the child, from the fallopian tube to the uterus, or whether it be external, uterine technology type stuff, whatever it be, that we need to pressure them to develop that technology that they don't currently feel because they all just resort to an abortion because it's the easy way out of it. So
me and you right now, we both have a friend who, and it's not exactly the same thing as reimplanting an ectopic pregnancy, but we have a mutual friend who has adopted frozen embryos.
Right.
And literally these embryos, probably smaller than what would be in an ectopic pregnancy, have been taken out of cryogenic freezing, been implanted, and they so far seem to be developing. Yep. So that can't mean that we are that far off from that type of technology. Maybe we actually do have the technology to do such a thing, because that sounds harder, a frozen embryo. Yeah,
it seems kind of like the industry hasn't been trying all that hard, but based on the amazing things we can do technologically, the idea that we haven't figured this one out yet does seem a little strange. Now, again, as a medical professional, I can't say for sure that's due to neglect on their part.
Right.
But it does seem it seems strange. It seems strange that there's, with all the amazing technology, that there doesn't seem to be anything in the works to develop that sort of treatment that can save that child's life.
All right, so let's define everything out real closely. What you're saying is, what is the procedure that we can do for an ectopic pregnancy that is not an abortion, but we may need to define first for the people who are listening.
Right.
Just because something can end in the death of a baby, that does not mean that was an abortion that took place. So we might need to define what's actually happening here. Is this an abortion or not? Because the pro-life industry and most denominations, we have these types of these positions where we want to have an exception for the life of the mother for an abortion, but we may not actually be talking about something that has to do with an abortion.
Right. And so there's a couple different procedures that can treat an ectopic pregnancy. Some of them ethical, some of them not. Okay. And so there are ways that you can provide chemicals. I think methotrexate would be one, or there might be others that does actively starve the child of nutrients. And
so that's an active killing,
right? It's an active killing, and there's depending on where the child implants, there may even be ways to dismember the child. Right.
And you sent me an article where I read it. It said that there was a child who survived that chemical. I read it, and that they were deformed later because of the chemical,
right?
Not because they were in an ectopic pregnancy. They could have survived even in the form of an ectopic pregnancy because they did.
Right.
But go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's a good point, because a lot of ectopic pregnancies are discovered on another opinion to not be ectopic pregnancies, and so that is
40% of the time.
Yeah.
At least in the information that I read was a 40% of when they diagnose an ectopic pregnancy.
Yeah.
Just isn't. Turns out that it's not.
Right.
Because over the time of development, it becomes obvious we were wrong.
Right.
Because that's not a pregnancy.
Yeah.
It might not be a pregnancy at all.
Right. Yeah.
So, go ahead. So you talk about these procedures. You talked about the chemical flooding of the body of the woman to be able to kill the baby directly. What do we have next?
Yeah. So there is something called a salpingectomy, which is, I think, what is most properly or what is absolutely not properly defined as abortion, where basically you go in and you cut out the small piece of the fallopian tube where the child has mistakenly implanted, and you remove that. And so it really is just a preterm delivery of the child. Now, again, that can be necessary at all points in the pregnancy, depending on a complication that may occur. And in this case, it's necessary at a part where you know that child isn't going to survive. But again, if you do nothing, you've got 2 deaths. Yes. And so the medical, I guess the moral calculus is, do we give this child another 6 hours or 12 hours of life, and in so doing risk the life of the mother, or do we remove part of this fallopian tube, essentially give birth to the child early? So
theoretically, let's say we got a mother who says, no, I want to sacrifice my life for this developing child. That's not really the case. That's not really the medical scenario, because what you're saying is it's not that this baby is actually going to live because she says, no, I want it to continue, keep letting it develop. What's going to happen is they actually both are dying.
Yep.
So that would be unethical to just take that approach of, well, all right, so we got a mother here willing to sacrifice her life. But it's not really a sacrifice because the child's going to die.
Right.
Because even her death will induce the death of the child.
Yep. Either way, and so it's important that the principle, and essentially the Hippocratic Oath is maintained, and that I think the way you put it in one of our messages, I thought was really good. You called it
Hippocratic disposition.
Yes, a Hippocratic disposition toward all patients involved, and so you're not ever going to intentionally destroy a child in order to save the mother. That's
not necessary.
Right. It's never necessary.
Never.
Right. And you also must maintain a Hippocratic disposition toward the mother and do everything that you can to save her life. And so when there's a way to do that does not directly destroy the child, and you are taking action to preserve life, the most human life that you can save, that is an action that should be taken. Now, again, you've got to be obviously sure that you're not, this isn't one of those 40%. You've got to be sure that, everything else is good. But yeah.
So that would require waiting. If you're going to make sure, you'd have to have a patient doctor, and they should be required, really,
Yep.
to wait to see, well, what is the development here? We're not at the stage of danger yet.
Yeah, and this is the other very important point, that occurs not in an abortion facility where they're not equipped for all of those emergencies. When emergencies happen at an abortion clinic, they have to take the woman to a hospital because abortion clinics aren't set up for that. And
you're saying this procedure isn't even done with an abortion clinic.
Mm-mm.
Not at all.
Nope.
So they're not involved at all in the process of relieving the situation of an ectopic pregnancy.
Yeah, this is something that's got to be done in a hospital with doctors observing all the time, not someone coming in for a couple hours and someone intentionally destroying their child. This is a very different thing. Should be treated differently by law. Should be I lost my train of thought there.
Well, so what
what
I'm hearing you say, though, is that this procedure is the equivalent of what we would all understand, the man on the street would understand as just a delivery. And we do not have once we make that delivery, in most of the situations, we do not have the technology at the moment to be able to give even better life-sustaining treatment to the baby in the fallopian tube. It's not that we're trying to kill the baby. What we're trying to do is do proper triage. Yep. And it just so happens that when we do what the proper triage would be to deliver the baby through the removal part of the fallopian tube, and at that point, we try everything we can, but right now, we do not have the tools that we need that would give true life-saving treatment to this baby at this point. But it will pass away, but not because we are trying to kill it. We're not inducing it with chemicals. Yep. We're not tearing it apart. We're not doing something to it. So that's a moral line that can never be crossed.
Right.
Oh, okay, so when we're talking about exceptions for the life of a mother, there actually is no abortion that is necessary to resolve this scenario.
Yep. When abortion is properly defined as intentional killing, there's never a case. And again, you don't have to take our word for this. There's more than 1,000 doctors, OBGYNs, who have testified to this fact. So,
but this is not the way the pro-life movement's going to define this at this moment, right?
Right.
But for ministers and those of us who are interested in abolition and bills of abolition, we will be hearing this language of no exceptions, no compromise.
Right.
We can let those ministers and everyone who are considering the abolition movement that when we talk about these things in a bill, it doesn't mean that we're just going to let women die.
Right.
There's actually a non-abortive procedure, and it likely does end in the death of a child, but it is not an abortion. And that procedure can easily be done to save the life of the mother. Is that correct?
Right. And what makes it difficult is that, like you said, the pro-life movement has been using this sort of language, or not all of. Like there are some pro-life groups who have defined abortion rightly and who don't consider this an abortion, but many do. And certainly like the politicians and many people who don't know any better do. And so one of the things we ran into actually with the SBC resolution is that a whole bunch of ethics professors wrote an article opposing the resolution. And in that article, they brought up this objection. It was one of their two main objections. And it was very frustrating because they actually sort of concede our point. Like they say that an explanation for why it says no exceptions might be that the pastors who authored this define abortion differently than we do. So they conceded that. But then they said, but the SBC has always defined abortion this way. And they cite all the past resolutions that had the exception for life of the mother tradition. And stuff. Right, and saying, well, this is how we've always done it, and so it's wrong to just change the language that we've used for a long time. That's going to be confusing. But it's like, if the language is bad, if the language is impugning,
these are ethicists.
Ethicists, right.
These
ethics
guys
professors.
Are the ones who are supposed to define the language.
Right.
And they themselves are saying we need to just take what we have done.
Yep, just keep doing it. Just because, not for any reason outside of it's just what we've done. Which was a rather frustrating thing to read, but that is the argument people are making, and people don't like being explained to that they haven't been doing something right. It's not always an easy thing to swallow, to acknowledge that the previous resolutions defined abortion wrongly, But you've got to put your pride aside when that's the case. If it was defined wrongly, then you need to change. You can't just say it's the way we've done it.
But you know what? You brought up a point earlier that was really important about the definition. If we define it the way that it has been traditionally defined, we are telling people who have had this procedure that they aborted their child, and they didn't.
Yeah.
Abortion is actively you killing that child. You taking an act to end its life that way.
Yep.
And so that's very dangerous to me when I'm hearing about this division between what is morally acceptable in medical triage. I can see how this true, accurate definition is comforting to a family who has been through this. Why would we want to tell them something that's not true that actually is even more painful?
Right.
But you're telling them, oh, you had to get an abortion. No, they may not have even gotten an abortion.
Yeah.
And that would be comforting to them to know, I didn't abort my child. There was no ethical line that was crossed here, not even close.
Right.
That all that happened was that the child was delivered, but the technology does not exist right now for us to take it further for the extending of its life.
Right. And
Go ahead.
Yeah, one of the very interesting things here is that the abortion supporters, they try to blur the lines between abortion and not just ectopics, but abortion and miscarriages, because they know that blurring these distinctions is what normalizes abortion. Because then they can say, look, you accept abortion in this case, and then this is a kind of abortion, and you say it's okay, or it's not morally wrong here. And so
I've heard them say, the body does abortions.
Right.
Natural abortions. That's not an abortion.
Right.
But we don't want to mimic their methods.
Yep. And if we allow them to define what abortion is, I mean, the people who define the terms of the game usually win the game.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to let abortion supporters normalize abortion by referring to things that aren't abortion or aren't rightfully defined as abortion.
Yeah.
That's a very harmful thing to parents, to in this battle to abolish it. It's a very damaging thing. Mm-hmm. And so we've got to keep it well defined, very, very strictly defined as the intentional killing of a human being.
We don't want the Hippocratic Oath violated.
Yep.
Ever. And it's being violated in many situations. Also, just as a minister, if I'm faced with something like this with a couple in my congregation, I want to know accurately what I'm really dealing with, because these people may be under the impression I had to get an abortion or I'm getting an abortion, and they're not. And I'm able to help them by saying, no, this procedure that you are fixing to have done, this is nothing wrong. This is what is necessary. This is good. This is right. You are not crossing some ethical line or it's not even a gray area that you have to agonize over. And as a minister, I got to be able to give accurate information to someone because it can help them. Now, but speaking of ministers, and this is kind of the last thing I would like to talk about, I just want to kind of open it up for you. I have lots of minister friends who are all wrestling with these things. These are good men. The whole reason they're wrestling with this is they don't want to see women die. They also don't want to see babies die. So there are some very attractive things about the abolition movement, and this is one of the things that they've wrestled with, that they're like, well, I don't know about this. If you could just quickly sit down with a minister and just say, you got 30 seconds, a minute, whatever, to explain to him why this no exception for the life of a mother is not a problem, what would you say to him?
So in this discussion, as in all discussions, it's very important to get the terms right. And we should not define things that are not abortions as abortions. Doing so impugns grieving parents. Doing so aids pro-aborts. And so we should define abortion very carefully as the intentional destruction of an innocent human being in the womb.
Okay, so start from there. We must define it as the intentional destruction of a human being in the womb. Mm-hmm. All right. We got to have those terms right. Now what?
Yep. And so there are procedures to treat ectopic pregnancies that is the intentional destruction of an innocent human being in the womb.
So we should avoid those.
And so those procedures are unethical. But there are procedures that are not tantamount to the intentional destruction, that are tantamount to basically good medical triage tantamount to giving, essentially giving or inducing a preterm labor.
Yes.
Preterm delivery. And so those procedures are the ethical, at least for now, while there isn't technology that can save both lives, that procedure is the most ethical route to go in this instance. And that is, it's crucial. It's crucial that we do not define that as an abortion for the reasons that have been stated.
All right. So a minister can look at the abolition movement once these terms are defined clearly for him. He can understand that there is not a necessary procedure that involves abortion to save the life of a mother, even though he knows this ectopic pregnancy does endanger the life of the mother, and that it can end in the death of a baby. But a procedure can be done that is not an abortion that does save the life of the baby. So that justifies having no exceptions for abortion. James, thank you very much. I would like you to stick around, and I'd like to talk to you about a few other things. But for right now, we're just going to shut this episode down because we wanted to keep it tight just to the ectopic pregnancy. And I hope that you guys enjoy this. Please have a discussion about it. And we ask you to connect with Free the States. James Silberman writes for Free the States, and they are kind of leading the way on a lot of the thought about abolitionism. And so we ask that you would go to their website and try to learn. They have a ton of information. The articles that James has been putting out recently are excellent. And so I just want to say goodbye and stay salty, Oklahoma. Bye-bye.